So, hello once again, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is Steve Taylor, and you are listening to another episode of the Do It For Yourself podcast, where I like to interview individuals in various doing their own business or in collateral entity, businesses tangential to that, and talk about the topics that are really important for those that are out there, doing it on their own. Talking about lessons learned, talking, trying to impart and put out there as much information as we can in education to help you out in any kind of decision you're going through. Once again, I always implore if anybody's listening to this, once again, my name is Steve Taylor, the lead advisor at Merited Wealth. Let me know. Let me know if you like it. Let me know if you don't like it. Let me know that, any topics you'd like to hear. And I really like to, like to cater it towards that. If you want to be a guest, just let me know. So this is going to be, I think, a pretty interesting topic. We're really going to be talking about a subject matter, something that might be coming up a lot for those of you that are trying to do it for yourself. But Paul, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Thanks for having me on the show today. So I'll skip the birth to like 30 story about myself, but no, I focus in commercial real estate finance, and I've owned a number of businesses in my career, six actually, and some really well, some maybe not so well. And the sort of theme that's run through my experience is real estate finance, and that's where I've had multiple businesses either in it or tangentially related to it. And really, where we focus is with business owners and entrepreneurs that own a business. It's a growing business, and they have a need for a local presence. So they have employees or customers or patients or somebody coming to a local presence. They're not sort of distributed throughout, and but they're currently renting their space, and they're at this crossroads where every time your lease comes up for renewal, you're sort of at this crossroads. Do we extend the lease? Or do we consider buying a space? And so we help guide and educate people through that decisioning process. And sometimes it makes sense to buy, and sometimes it makes sense to lease. So, there are advantages and disadvantages in both camps. And we've found, though, over time, watching sort of the two camps, the ones where it made sense that actually made the decision to buy, 10, 20 years downstream had a profound effect on their wealth accumulation, as opposed to the ones that just lease the space typically.
Yeah. I have a personal story of an office condo I looked to buy in 2007. It was, perfect timing, right before the global meltdown, and I was able to get out of that. That was fine. But let's fast forward to today, Paul. I like to start by just getting what you're seeing, a general sense, right? We're a couple years out of COVID. The whole commercial space, the need for space in general, the whole conversation has changed, right? A lot of these large buildings are trying to be retrofitted. But it seems that small businesses, the conversations I'm having with clients and different people, their need and their desire for first of all, space hasn't changed that much. And it seems like those conversations about, like you said, whether to purchase or lease aren't changing that much. What are you seeing out there, kind of like maybe to say, it's a little different than how it was in the past, or how the market in general is looking?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I get asked that a lot. I mean, we talk about commercial real estate and owning space. It's one of these things that it's a very large universe, and everything kind of gets lumped into commercial real estate. And you mentioned sort of the flight from the large Class A office building, the towers, the downtown towers, and things like that. And there's definitely challenges in that space and in the shopping mall space and things like that. We've changed our habits of working and living. Particularly through COVID. Obviously, people came home, worked from home, and a lot of people chose not to go back to work. A lot of companies have adopted more of a hybrid philosophy on that. But there's a lot of businesses, though, that again, the locally based ones, particularly like service related businesses, where whether it's a home service business, it could be in the medical space, particularly where, and even retail, small retail, like your coffee shops, your breweries, your things like that, these microbreweries, those are, those spaces are in high demand, and that's in high need because what we're seeing is, and I think the trend is going to continue, that as people sort of retracted back to their houses, and you couldn't go out to dinner, you couldn't go socialize with people, that we sort of have developed this desire, maybe it's always been there, but really to be around people, and so like the local space, it's great to buy things online and Amazon. And there was a transition where people, didn't buy online. And then, everyone thought Amazon was going to dominate the world. And certainly they've done amazing things, but still, how often do you find yourself going out because you want to go look at something or see somebody or have an experience somewhere? And you hear a lot of talk about the experiential economy. People want that. And I think too, the other thing is, interestingly enough, with like artificial intelligence and all the stuff we're talking about, chat and everything, as the world becomes faker and faker, with what you see online and things like that, the videos that they're creating, and people are they're craving more and more of this personal interaction, authenticity. And I think that gives small businesses and local businesses an edge in a sense, because you can look somebody in the eye, and people want that. They really do. And even employees that were working from home, a lot of them are still not back in 5 days a week, but they want to be in 3 days a week or 2 days a week or 4 days a week, some kind of a hybrid model that seems to work really well for the business owner, the employee, and whatnot. But they still have to have somewhere to come. And so we're seeing in most areas, because we work nationally, there's a lot of demand for these small retail spaces or just small standalone spaces. If you're sub 5,000 square feet, it's hard to come by. Just like on the residential space, there's supply issues across the board, unless you're in an area, obviously, where people are fleeing to go somewhere else for a litany of different reasons. If you're anywhere else, there's demand for that. And we don't really see it slowing, quite frankly. A lot of our clients are forced with the decision to consider building because there's nothing that they can find in their area that suits their purposes or that might be available in the short term.
Yeah, you're hitting a lot of those topics. These conversations we're having. I was just having one yesterday about someone that bought a space, wasn't necessarily perfect for what so they're considering building on it, but then also the appreciation has happened as things start coming. Well, their space is kind of unique, but the appreciation's happening. So do they just do a quick flip? So let's focus a little bit on the professional, that services, right? Those type of businesses that are out there, set aside from like industrial. I understand those concepts of warehouse space and the numbers of that. Me personally, what I did many years ago, and I would never do it again, I'd be interested to get your thoughts. I bought a commercial office condo versus a standalone building, because as you say, standalone buildings are really hard to come by. Are you seeing anything, or what would you say about those? If somebody that's considering investing in a commercial condo versus a standalone building, what are some of the pros and cons, or have you seen comparing those two kind of assets?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and it obviously depends on the condo and the location, that sort of thing. But condos have their own sort of set of rules and limitations and guidelines and things that you have to follow and be a part of. And so we're not thrilled with condos if because you're not really the owner. You sort of own the inside walls of the space. And so part of this whole idea of owning your space, and I wrote a book about it, was getting control back. And as a condo owner, you've got your foot in the game and you have some ownership, but there's so many other variables that you still don't have control over, like assessments, what your neighbors are going to do, just a lot of things. And so we try to steer people away from that when possible. But again, sometimes it absolutely makes sense. It depends on where you are. Like in some, faster growing, more suburban, almost metro areas, like in a Northern Virginia area, which is not far from us, that's all you're going to find. And they're going to appreciate and value over time. And so you can make the case that, all right, well, this, it works. It's not optimal in our opinion, if you have a choice.
Yeah, no, I understand. And let me go back a little, Paul, as you mentioned to start, a lot of these people that if they do make that choice to buy they see over the long term, over the 10, 15, 20 years, it makes a big difference in their personal net worth, right? Because there's been so much appreciation in all these buildings, that are out there. So I appreciate the value of buying that standalone, right? This is for the long term of the business. What have you seen? And because the conversation I'm having, one of the nuances with a lot of different clients, but this one particular client, they're really growing fast, right? So they put the money down, they're going to build a space. How do you know if that space is going to meet your needs 5, 10 years from now? So for those businesses, like a fast growing business, they think they want to get a space, they want to get in there, but they don't know where they're gonna top off. What would you say to those kind of purchasers that this may be their forever home, but it may not?
Sure, sure. I mean, that's a great question and a great problem to have. I'll say too, right? We'll say that. I think there's a couple of ways to skin that cat. There's two approaches that come to mind. One, I have a client we just closed, and he's breaking ground right now on a 12,000 square foot flex warehouse space. He's got a high-end remodeling company, and he doesn't need 12,000 square feet. So what he's doing is he is building out the 8,000 feet that his business is going to go in. And with the idea, and he has been growing quite quickly, that over the next couple of years, he'll eventually grow into the additional space, he thinks and he hopes. But however, in the meantime, he's found two tenants to take the other 4,000 feet. He's subdivided that into two 2,000 square foot flex warehouse spaces. And at the market rent that they're paying, they've already signed leases pre-construction because it's in high demand. I mean, it's down at the beach area in Virginia. It's in very high demand. And so they're almost going to carry their rent will almost carry the freight of the entire mortgage on this building. So he's got a fast growing business. He could afford the freight on the entire building, but he doesn't have to since he's leasing it out. And oh, by the way, in 3 years, if his business has grown to the point where he needs more space, he'll just not renew the lease of one of the two tenants or both of them, or he might do it in stages over time. You could structure that a 1 year lease, a 2, a 3, a 5, however you want to structure it based on the growth of your business. So that's one way to do it. And if he never grows, then he could just let them pay the building off on his behalf, and it's a good day, right? The other strategy is, or another strategy is to consider having multiple locations. And so you could, based on your business, the type of business you have, and the geography that you serve, you might opt for a strategy where you're going to buy in one particular part, because like Miami, I know is very big where you are. So there's different areas of Miami, I'm sure, where, okay, we're going to serve people in this one area. This is our first building. This is where our business is headquartered, and we're going to build this out. And we think, this is going to cover us for at least 3 or 4 years, but we're going to open a second location across town in another area that's also hot and growing, maybe in 2 years from now. So we're going to do this over time. We had a dentist that did that. He came out of school with the idea of, I want to, in the 5 borough areas of down in Virginia Beach, he wanted to have a building essentially in each area over time. And so he bought the first building. And then a few years later, 20 minutes away, which was only about, 7 or 8 miles, and as a crow flies, he was able to acquire another building as what we call an owner user building. And just to footnote this a little bit too, because a lot of people think getting into like commercial real estate is very expensive and takes a lot of money, and it can. But if you're buying an owner user space where your business is occupying at least 51% of the space, then there's some amazing programs where you can get in for 0 to 10% down instead of like a 20 to 25% down payment that typically it requires for commercial real estate. So he was leveraging the lower down payment by setting up the second building and then hiring a dental student graduate out of school to run it. And then he did it again and again. So 12 years later, he's got 5 locations, and he's got a pretty serious business. So his business has grown substantially, but also his real estate business, which is underneath everything, just passively, has also grown substantially. And so that's another way to approach it. You could also just buy another building and move if you had to. I mean, that's how tough is that, right?
No, I like both of those. I really like both of those, right? Basically, you're saying, just think if you're growing and you're unsure if this is going to be big enough, even think further, even think larger, right?
Yeah.
Buy more, build more than you need in sublease. That's always a great way to finance any kind of real estate. But this other one, have multiple locations, right, to be able to accomplish that same thing. And then if you don't grow, maybe the second one you lease, you don't renew that lease. I really like both of those strategies. So let's move into, I think, what would be the hottest topic and really, close to your heart. So I have another real estate investment I went into with a friend, and we did this. We bought the building and we subleased it out. But that was about 4 years ago, right? Real estate loan and interest rates were totally different.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about in this, arena. It's anybody's guess whether we're higher for longer on rates or whatever it might be, right? But with higher interest rates, about financing, and always what's interesting to me, I think, and maybe you'll tell me that when most people go to purchase these properties, they're not going to buy it cash, they're going to finance it. There seems to be the SBA loans, that are coming in there a lot. So talk about those, two together, about interest rates in general, and then SBA versus non-SBA loan.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So we'll start there and then go back. So we'll finish with interest rates. Well, I'll get my crystal ball out and rub it and,
Yeah.
tell you what I think, but how it impacts everything. There's essentially about 5 ways to buy commercial real estate. So you can pay cash, which we don't recommend. There's seller financing, which is if you're buying an existing building, which can be some of the best financing out there because you can negotiate it directly with the seller and negotiate terms. A lot of times you have someone who maybe someone inherited a building from their parents, or maybe you have someone who, the silver wave of America, they want to retire, but they don't want to sell the building because they don't really have anything to move the money into. Or maybe they have kids that would all want to take the money. So they would prefer to have almost an annuitized payment where, they would sell it back to you on a fixed note or some kind of a note in terms. And many times you get better terms there. There's conventional financing where you go down to a local bank, and this is what most people do. And most people get this hair and they're like, oh, I think I'd like to buy space. And so they go down and talk to the bank that they've been dealing with since they opened their business, and they've got a great relationship. And they find out that the bank, wants 20 to 25% down. It's going to be a 20-year amortization probably and a 5-year balloon. So every 5 years, they're going to have to refinance. And oh, by the way, the bank's going to want to make sure they keep their deposits there, and they have covenants and things like that. Because really, the bank just wants your deposits. They don't really want to loan you all that money for real estate, which is a whole nother conversation. But there are private groups of capital out there that'll fund these things based upon certain situations. You have insurance companies that will fund commercial real estate. You have venture capital. You have family offices. You have private investment groups per se that are looking for great return on their investment. And then you mentioned SBA, which we do a lot with SBA. There's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about SBA. SBA doesn't really do loans. SBA just guarantees loans that other people do, whether it's a federally chartered bank or private lenders, private investors. You can get an SBA loan, and they can be great. And there's two types. There's what's called a 7A and a 504, and they can both be used for real estate acquisition. They both have pluses and minuses. Some of the advantages of both of those programs versus like a traditional bank is the down payments are generally lower. As I said, again, you can get as low as 0% if it's structured the right way and the business is producing enough cash. Most typically 10% is what you're going to see. The amortizations are longer. They're 25 years versus 20, which means the payments are going to be lower typically than on a 20-year amortization, which is helpful for cash flow if you're running a business, because you got to make sure your cash flow, particularly if you have a growing business, because growing businesses really eat cash and demand cash. So they have that. They don't require a refinance after 5 years. They don't have balloons. They're 25-year AMs, and some of them can be fixed rates for 25 years, but some of them have a variable component. So it just depends on structure. And they have different, again, pros and cons. One may require you to pledge your house as collateral if you don't put enough down payment down. The other, the 504 does not require that. The 504 can be a little more complex and complicated than the 7A. But again, they are available, and they're great tools to use for people. And so, and interest rates are going to vary based upon all these programs that we talk about. Right now we see probably the best rates that we've seen out there are generally going to be the 504 loan. It's a blended rate because basically the 504 is it's two loans in one. It's an underlying loan and then a bond on top of that, without getting into a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, that's going to be right now about the high sixes. You're going to see, and then the 7As are going to be in probably the sevens to all the way up to 11, based upon who you go with, how you structure it, that sort of thing. Um, but interest rates, per se, yes, they're higher than they were when you bought your building 4 years ago. I think we could probably say that if we look at the history of interest rates over the last 50 years, they were higher than they were 4 years ago when you bought your building, right?
Right.
So that was an anomaly. We're still paying the price for that because obviously the Fed intervened in not only by reducing the prime rate, but in holding it low, much lower and longer than they needed to. But they also bought treasuries and mortgage-backed securities and loaded up the balance sheet with trillions of dollars of debt. And by their buying action, they kept rates really low artificially. And so we've seen in the last couple of years, they've been flooding the bond market back with these notes off of their balance sheet. And they've just signaled last month that June they were gonna curtail that significantly, and so that part of the pressure on interest rates is now going away. We see the inflationary numbers are easing, based on what you look at. The unemployment numbers are really kind of squirrely right now. If you look at the BLS, I call it the BS because their numbers. It's amazing how the unemployment numbers are the same every week with how many hundreds of millions of people we have working. But anyway, that's starting to get figured out. So all of the big money thinks that we've hit the peak and we're going to be trending down somewhat. When that happens, I can't say. We obviously have an election in November. It'd be interesting to see how that's going to impact everything, right? I mean, it's obviously a lot going on there. But the point is that here's the thing about interest rates. So if property values generally aren't going down, unless we're talking about, again, Class A office space or shopping malls, we're talking about these locally based, these buildings that are in decent areas where people aren't fleeing the cities or coming into the cities. It's growth areas. They're going up in value over time, whether it's, we don't know this year or next year, but 5, 10, 15 years is a pretty good bet, like it's been. And interest rates go up and down, right? So if someone comes in and they can qualify and it makes sense on today's interest rates, then if interest rates do go down and improve in the next year or 2 or 3 years, then you can always refinance the loan. It's like your personal home. You're not locked into that, but you can't, necessarily now renegotiate the price of the building, right? I mean, if you say, well, I'm going to wait because this building today is $1.5 million, and I think that interest rates are too high. Well, okay, what do you think it's going to be in 2 years and 3 years? If interest rates do come down, that's going to create probably even more demand on space, and more demand on space raises the price. So it's nobody has a crystal ball and there's no guarantee. But here's what I will say is that if you're in your business for a long run and you're profitable now and you've got a good game plan and you see that there's a runway ahead of you, then there's no need to be overly concerned about that. But if you're in a business that's not that stable and it's variable and you're not sure what the next couple of years are going to bring, then I would say by all means do not buy. Don't do it. It doesn't make sense, regardless of the interest rates.
No, that's good advice. I mean, anybody going into this, you got to run your numbers. You got to have your spreadsheet. You got to know what numbers work, right? And if interest rates go down, hey, great, wonderful. We save a little extra money. So, Paul, as we wrap up here, what would you say to someone who is considering going into commercial real estate for their business, right? Whatever it might be, to buy that office space. When they're looking to go into that, what is like the first 1, 2, few things they should be thinking about really to determine whether owning a commercial property may or may not be right for them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it all starts with the first of all, your business plan. We talked about it a little bit in terms of where are you? How is your business performing now? How has it performed over the last several years? And then what are your goals in 3 years and 5 years and 7 years? I mean, where do you see it going legitimately based on some pretty good assumptions? So you need to kind of understand that plan and that roadmap for yourself first at a business standpoint. The next thing is you need to make sure your financial house is in order. Because it's a big decision to make. It will require some capital. And what we're going to look at is the last 3 years of your personal and business tax returns. We're going to look at something called a personal financial statement. A lot of people that buy residential homes, we all do that. You never need a personal financial statement, but for a commercial, you do, which is basically a balance sheet and a P&L for your personal life. Your assets, your liabilities, your income, debts, that sort of thing. So we're going to look at that, but. So you're going to want to make sure that's put together decently well, and that we're going to put the most emphasis on the last year's results of the business. So if the business is doing really well, and it had a bad year maybe during COVID, but it's rebounded, then that's okay. If you probably should be talking to, if you're married, to your spouse to vet this idea, because they might have different plans than you. Yeah. They might be thinking, well, I want to be out of this business in 5 years. I want to move, or who knows what it is. But it's really important. And I say that because we've seen people before that didn't have those conversations until well downstream in the process. And it just creates problems for everybody. Yeah. So get on the same sheet of music. And then I think, and I'm a little biased, but I would recommend, I wrote a little book on it. Basically it's an hour and a half read with a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning. It's not Moby Dick. And it's designed to educate, to give you sort of the whole high level process of what's involved in it. So, going in before you engage, we talk about the pros, the cons, and the pitfalls, and then the different loan programs are out there, the people that are going to be involved in the process, how to find properties, the whole 9 yards. So that you know what to expect before you even engage a conversation with anybody. I would say don't go out and look at property today and engage in realtors and all that until you do some of your own homework first and have a good understanding, because you want to know eyes wide open. And then the last thing I'll say is that it is a process. And so, again, unlike going out and buying a personal residence where, you could drive by a beautiful home on Saturday and say, oh, I think I want this house, I want to move. You can be in contract and closed and in that house in 30 days. That's not going to happen in commercial real estate, right? So figure by the time that you identify the property and go in contract, it's probably 8 to 12 weeks from that point before you're going to even close. Yes. So, and you figure it's going to take 2 to 3 months to probably find the ideal property. So now we're talking 4 to 6 months from the time you are seriously ready and your finances in order. And if you decide you want to build something, figure another, instead of 2 to 3 months to find it, you've got to find land. And then, your build time might be a year. So this is something you need to be contemplating well in advance of the lease renewal in 30 to 60 days. And, it might be a good time after you just renewed the lease to start thinking about it, if it's a 3-year lease renewal for sure. But at least a year or two out to start getting things in order, getting some questions answered so that you're ready and make a good choice.
Paul, I love those answers. I can't stress more, when I'm doing my financial planning with couples, right? Make sure both people are on the same page, have this conversation now, save so much, pain down the road. But I love this, Paul. I think this has been really great, really helpful, right? And I would say, my couple takeaways here would be, when you're going to do this, when you're going to buy, go big. I think the first idea, right? Go big. More than what it might be. It's probably much better than just shoehorning yourself into a space, maybe not to make it work, because you're going to be creating new problems for yourself, right, to go through that. And then number 2, right, run your numbers, assume interest rates won't change. If your numbers work, if your business is steady, it could make sense, right? Then you can start taking those next steps. And listen, I appreciate it. You send us information on your book. We'll put it in the show notes. People can go out there and buy it. That's great. So, Paul, listen, man, I really appreciate your time. I found this really enlightening and helpful. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Steve, it was great. Appreciate you having me on.